It was too late, and Emily couldn't tell exactly what time it was, but she was sure no one should be calling at this hour. Even if it was Ethan, she wasn't in the mood. She buried her face in the pillow, muttering, "Thank God." Just as she was starting to drift off, the phone rang again. Emily cursed under her breath, reopening her eyes. "Ethan, answer your damn phone," she muttered. But as she scanned the empty bed, she realized he wasn't beside her. The clock read 3:37 a.m. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, confusion creeping in. Ethan had been there when they went asleep. "Hello," she answered groggily. "Is this Emily Blake?" came the voice on the other end. "Yes, this is she," Emily replied, rubbing her eyes. "Who's calling?" "This is Northtown Medical Center's emergency room. Your husband was brought in about an hour ago. We had your contact info from a previous incident. Could you come down right away? He's been in a car accident." Her heart dropped. "Is he okay?" "I'm not authorized to discuss his condition over the phone, ma'am, but please come as soon as you can," the caller urged. "It's important." "Of course. I'll be there as fast as I can," Emily promised, already rushing out of bed. She dashed upstairs to her daughter's room. Chloe, who had decided to live at home after freshman year, was still asleep. Emily didn't have time for explanations. "Chloe, wake up," she said, shaking her daughter's shoulder. Chloe blinked up at her mother, confused. "Your dad's been in an accident. He's in the ER. We need to go now." Emily grabbed clothes from Chloe's closet and started dressing her daughter. Once she was ready, they rushed out the door. On the way to the hospital, Chloe bombarded her with questions, but Emily didn't have answers. The drive seemed endless, even though it was only 10 minutes with light traffic. When they arrived, the sight of Ethan in the hospital room, unconscious and covered in bandages, hit them both hard. As they filled out paperwork, a nurse looked up and said flatly, "Your grief doesn't exempt you from paperwork." Emily didn't respond. She just wanted to focus on Ethan. Chloe pulled her chair closer to her father, and they sat quietly for nearly an hour until 2 police officers entered the room. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Karen Lawson, and this is my partner, Mark Bennett," one of them introduced. "We were the first to respond to the scene," Officer Lawson added. Emily's heart skipped. "Any updates on his condition?" "We haven't been briefed yet," Officer Bennett said. "This is my daughter, Chloe. We have some questions for you," Emily said, her voice tight. "I know this is hard, but we need to get this out of the way." Officer Lawson nodded. "Can you confirm where your husband was before the accident?" "We were at home," Emily said. "We went to bed around 10 p.m. I didn't know he'd left until you called." "Chloe, can you confirm that?" Officer Bennett turned to her daughter. "Yes. We watched a movie and went to bed around the same time," Chloe said, yawning. "I saw Dad go to the bedroom with Mom. Did you notice any issues, like financial or marital problems?" Officer Lawson asked. Emily shook her head. "No, nothing out of the ordinary. No problems that I can think of. We've been fine." She paused, troubled. "I just don't understand why he left without telling me anything. Were there any injuries in the other vehicle?" Emily quickly asked, trying to steer the conversation. "That's the thing, Mrs. Blake," Officer Bennett replied. "It was a single-car crash. According to witnesses, your husband's car was driving normally, then suddenly accelerated into a tree. No skid marks, no brake lights. It just happened." Emily and Chloe exchanged a tense look, the implication clear. "Are you suggesting my husband, that he tried to hurt himself?" Emily's voice trembled as she spoke the dreaded words. "We'll need to examine the car for mechanical issues, and of course, we'll talk to your husband when he wakes up. It's one of the possibilities we're considering," Officer Lawson explained. "Are you sure there was nothing else?" Emily pressed. "My husband and I have a strong marriage. There's no reason he would." "It's a possibility we can't ignore," Officer Lawson cut in. Emily wiped her eyes, feeling the sting of her tears. "I believe it was just a loss of control. Maybe he nodded off. It was late. It could have been that." Officer Lawson handed her a card. "If you remember anything else, please reach out." She and Officer Bennett left the room without another word. As the door clicked shut, Chloe turned to her mother. "You didn't tell them?" "No," Emily replied softly, wiping her eyes. "It's not relevant." Your father wouldn't want them to know. Maybe he'll explain when he wakes up. We'll see. The following days dragged on. Ethan stayed unconscious in the hospital, and Emily and Chloe stayed by his side, making sure he wasn't alone. Emily called Ethan's work to explain his absence, carefully avoiding any mention of the accident's cause. It was Saturday when it happened, and by Wednesday morning, there were signs that Ethan might be waking up. By noon, his eyes fluttered open, though he could barely focus on anything. Emily, who had been waiting anxiously by his side, moved closer to reassure him. Shortly after Ethan's eyes fluttered open, a nurse rushed in upon seeing the alert on the monitors. Emily returned to her seat, allowing the nurse to attend to him. Soon, more doctors arrived to assess his condition. Taking advantage of the moment, Emily stepped outside to call Chloe and let her know her father had woken up. But when there was no answer, she left a voicemail. As medical staff continued to remove equipment, it became clear that Ethan's left arm was fractured. Fortunately, since he was right-handed, it wouldn't be a major issue. His throat was sore from the tube, so the nurse provided him with a whiteboard for communication. After reading his message, she nodded and left to consult with the other doctors. Mrs. Blake, I'm afraid your husband has requested that you and your daughter not be allowed in his room, the nurse informed her. What? Emily's voice raised in protest. He's my husband. I have every right to be by his side. I understand, Mrs. Blake, the nurse said calmly, but the patient's wishes come first. Let me speak with him, and we'll sort this out. Emily tried to bypass the nurse, but was stopped. Frustrated, she raised her voice. Ethan, please talk to me. What's going on? The nurse's expression tightened. Mrs. Blake, please, you're disturbing the other patients. You can wait outside, but if you continue to disrupt, we'll have to ask you to leave. Emily's shoulders slumped in resignation. Fine, she muttered, moving to the waiting area outside the room. Chloe arrived soon after, surprised to find her mother sitting outside the room. Mom, what's going on? Why are you out here? She asked. Dad forbade us from entering, Emily replied, her voice strained. Us? Chloe frowned. I get why he banned you, but why me? And why didn't you answer my texts? It took you forever to get here. I had just woken up when Ryan came by to check on me. We're kind of a thing, Chloe explained, her tone unapologetic. I needed to unwind. It was stressful, and it helped. You chose to be with your boyfriend instead of being here for Dad? Emily's voice grew sharp. I'm sorry, Mom, Chloe said with a shrug. Dad was unconscious when I left. I didn't think there was a rush. You should call him, though, when you get the chance. I won't do that. Not now, Emily muttered, clearly annoyed. It's disrespectful, Emily said, her eyes narrowing. Chloe couldn't help but chuckle at her mother's disapproval. But before the argument could escalate, a knock interrupted them. A tall, attractive brunette entered the room, dressed professionally but not in medical attire. Her badge identified her as part of the hospital staff. Good morning, Mr. Blake. I'm Dr. Turner, one of the hospital's mental health specialists. How are you feeling? She asked with a kind smile. As well as can be expected, I suppose. It's been 9 days since the accident, Ethan replied, now able to speak without the help of a whiteboard. He asked about his discharge date but didn't get a clear answer. The hospital asked me to speak with you, Dr. Turner explained. It's up to you. If you want to go home soon, I need to clear you for discharge. Dr. Turner gave him a quizzical smile. Let's get started then. She pulled up a chair beside the bed, crossing her legs, and began reviewing his medical documents. All right, so you were admitted over a week ago following the accident involving the tree, she began, eyes scanning his records. I also see that you've prohibited your wife and daughter from visiting you. I suspect there's a connection there, she said thoughtfully. Ethan paused, his jaw tightening. I see, he said quietly. You said your wife was unfaithful, Dr. Turner observed. Unfortunately, infidelity is common these days, though it rarely leads to the extreme actions you're describing. Is there more to it? Ethan hesitated, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He hadn't been ready to talk about this, especially not with an attractive woman. He wondered if there was a male psychiatrist available. But Dr. Turner waited patiently, accustomed to people being reluctant. Finally, he spoke. I think I've been dealing with depression. It was never officially diagnosed, but I've just felt off, down, for a while. Couldn't shake it. He paused, struggling to continue. There was also the issue with my hardness. That started about a year after my previous accident. Dr. Turner raised an eyebrow. Right. It's possible your wife knew, maybe even had access to your medical records. She may have been waiting for you to admit it. Ethan sighed. It wasn't even an accident. I was in the back seat. My boss was in the front, and his boss was driving. We got rear-ended. No airbags went off, and there wasn't much damage, but I banged my head on the seat in front of me. I think that's what caused it. The report says you sustained a mild concussion, Dr. Turner confirmed. The medical team wasn't able to pinpoint the exact cause, though. None of the medications worked. They ran tests, some of them more than once, and the most they could figure out was that the accident caused damage to part of my brain. And I just couldn't. Well, Ethan trailed off, discomfort flooding him. Dr. Turner nodded sympathetically. So, your wife became dissatisfied with your sex life, which led her to have an affair? Ethan's shoulders slumped. Yeah, and after that, everything just fell apart. That's when I started feeling like I couldn't control anything anymore. Dr. Turner let his words hang in the air for a moment before asking, how long did it take for your wife's infidelity to start? About 7 or 8 months, I think, Ethan replied quietly. We tried to address the issue in other ways. Seeking help, Ethan said quietly. Dr. Turner nodded. I understand the process, Mr. Blake. I've had intimate relationships before, she said, reassuring him. Of course. Sorry, just a bit uncomfortable, Ethan admitted. No worries, she replied. Anyway, at first, everything seemed okay. We had hoped my condition might improve. We even talked about spending weekends in bed together. But it never happened. Eventually, it dragged on too long, and she decided to meet her needs elsewhere. Did she talk to you about it first? Dr. Turner asked. No. I found out when I came home early from work, Ethan answered. Not only was she with her lover, but my daughter and her boyfriend were there too. Did they engage in group activities? Dr. Turner asked, sounding surprised. No, thankfully, Ethan replied. Emily and Jack were in the bedroom, Chloe and Ryan were in the living room. That's when I found out about the affair, he continued. And my daughter knew and seemed to approve. That explains why your daughter was excluded, Dr. Turner noted. Yes, Ethan nodded. Oh, if I haven't mentioned it, Jack is Ryan's father. We knew him as our daughter's boyfriend's father. Later, I found out it was Chloe who suggested Jack to her mother. That's another blow, Ethan added. Did you confront them? Dr. Turner asked. Not exactly. Maybe if Chloe hadn't been there, I would have confronted Emily. But I'd seen enough. I just left, Ethan recalled. And what happened after? It wasn't what I expected. Emily expressed regret that I found out, but made it clear that if I couldn't meet her needs, she'd find someone who would. She said she preferred a committed partner, not someone she had to find anew. Jack was single, and he shared her needs. So, he became her choice. And your reaction? Dr. Turner asked. What could I do? Ethan shrugged. She was right. I couldn't engage in intimacy. It wasn't her fault. So, she did what she had to. Dr. Turner pressed further. What if she had discussed it with you first? Would you have agreed? Ethan paused, reflecting. I've thought about that a lot. Part of me wanted to say yes because I loved her and wanted her happiness. But in the end, I don't think I could have agreed to it. We made vows, including in sickness and health. I couldn't betray that, and I couldn't understand how she could betray me. Did she continue seeing him? Dr. Turner asked. I don't know the exact frequency. It started when I was at work, but now it included weekends. She'd go out, even to the store, spending time with Jack. It was hard to see. That must have been difficult, Dr. Turner sympathized. Difficult? That's an understatement, Ethan said, shaking his head. I felt powerless. She deserved intimacy, but I couldn't give it to her. It tore me apart. Dr. Turner nodded, her voice soft. Tell me about the night of the accident. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then began. We watched a movie as a family. I kept my pain to myself. Looking back, I might have made a mistake by not sharing it, but I didn't want to burden Emily or Chloe. After the movie, they exchanged goodnight kisses, and Chloe gave me a simple night. That's when I realized she'd lost respect for me as a father and a man. And I couldn't blame her, because I didn't respect myself either. I went to bed like usual. Emily did too, but I waited until she was asleep. Then I got dressed, grabbed my wallet and keys, and went to check on Chloe. She was asleep. I blew her a kiss, said goodbye, and went to my car. And then? Dr. Turner asked, leaning in. I knew there were airbags, but I didn't care. I thought, if I hit hard enough, they won't matter. I didn't have a plan, just drove around aimlessly until I passed a large oak tree. I realized there was a clear path. On the second pass, I headed straight for it. Silence settled between them as they both absorbed the gravity of his words. Dr. Turner finally spoke. Mr. Blake, I want to thank you for your openness. It's rare to hear such honesty. I'll leave you to rest now. Would it be all right if I come back tomorrow? I'm not going anywhere, Ethan replied, his tone dry. They shook hands, and Dr. Turner left. Ethan retrieved his phone, which he'd left behind that night, and Emily brought it to him. Despite his protests, he answered several emails and messages from his boss about the accident before trying to sleep. Back at home, Emily was struggling. She had convinced herself that Ethan had accepted her relationship with Jack, thinking it was a sign of love and understanding. But doubts began to creep in as she reconsidered the events. She feared the police might see it as a suicide attempt, particularly given the nature of the accident, and she worried that her affair with Jack might come under scrutiny. Although infidelity wasn't a crime, she feared it might affect Ethan's case. She couldn't recall Ethan ever being indifferent to her affair, and she couldn't bear the thought of a life without intimacy. Upon Ethan's return home, Emily resolved to be more attuned to his emotions and maintain boundaries with Jack, though she was determined not to end her relationship with him. The next morning, Dr. Turner returned, and Ethan noticed the slight changes in her attire. He still felt withdrawn but greeted her. How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Blake? She asked. Not much different from yesterday, Doc, he replied. Ready to head home? I suppose, but it's up to you, Ethan said. Partially. However, by state law, you're required to stay for 72 hours. The countdown started with our conversation yesterday, so you have at least 2 more days, Dr. Turner explained. All right. At least the food here isn't terrible, Ethan joked, and they shared a brief laugh. Dr. Turner smiled. It's good to see you able to joke. Yeah, it's been months since I felt like myself. I used to be quite the joker, even got on Chloe's nerves sometimes, Ethan reflected. Have you had any more troubling thoughts? Any dark places? Dr. Turner asked gently. No, not really. I've been feeling more angry and disappointed. Disappointed in Emily and Chloe, but mostly in myself for not standing up for myself, for not making it clear to Emily that her actions were unacceptable, Ethan admitted. Do you plan to take a stand now? Dr. Turner asked. Absolutely. While part of me wants to file for divorce, I have to admit my role in letting things escalate. But if Emily agrees to end things with Jack, I'll seek counseling and try to repair our marriage, Ethan declared. I admire your determination, Mr. Blake. Such a quick turnaround is rare, Dr. Turner acknowledged. I've had a lot of time to think while lying here. I appreciate you letting me talk, to confide in someone. It helped me sort things out, Ethan said gratefully. Excellent. I'll check in one last time tomorrow, but I see no reason you can't be discharged as scheduled, Dr. Turner concluded. Ethan looked forward to it. When he was discharged, Emily and Chloe were there to pick him up. If he was going to change things, he had to act as though change was already here. The airbags had worked better than he expected, though the concussion still required him to rest in a dimly lit room. Emily and Chloe fussed over him, and everything seemed fine until Emily mentioned going shopping. No, Ethan replied calmly. What? Emily responded, puzzled. We don't need to go. Make a list for Chloe. She can handle it, Ethan insisted. Why drag me into this, Dad? I've got plans with Ryan, Chloe interjected. Then you'll have extra incentive to hurry up, Ethan said firmly. Emily, make the list. This is absurd, Ethan. You can't just come home and upend everything. Chloe has plans, and I'm going to the store. End of discussion, Emily protested. Do you take me for a fool, Emily? Ethan challenged. Fool? No, Ethan, never. Why would you say that? Emily responded, defensive. Because I know exactly what these trips are. They're just an excuse to see Jack. I've never forgotten you bringing groceries home, but you've been gone too long. I can see it in your eyes when you avoid mine, in your clothes, in your makeup. It's all a little different, Ethan said, his voice steady. And you've been with Jack. That's over now. Shock flashed across Emily's face, and Chloe, watching, felt a new respect for her father. Ethan, please, we've already discussed this, Emily said, her voice softening. I'll be more careful, but I won't give up on Jack. I have a right to a life outside of this marriage. So our vows meant nothing? To stand by each other in sickness and health? Ethan asked, his voice firm. This is part of the sickness. You don't abandon people. But I'm not ending things with Jack. We'll seek counseling, or else I'll file for divorce, Ethan declared. You won't do this, Ethan Blake. Don't you dare threaten me, Emily snapped. If I could engage only with you, I would. But circumstances won't allow it. It's not my fault. I didn't cause the accident. My sex life is over, and I'm supposed to just accept it? I'm going to the store, to see Jack, and take care of my needs. If you want to discuss this later, fine. But don't think for a second you can tell me what I can or can't do. Emily stormed out, slamming the door behind her, rattling the windows. The silence that followed was heavy. Father and daughter exchanged a glance, then Ethan retreated to his bedroom. For the first time, Chloe worried about her parents' future. Dad had never truly confronted Mom, and this was something far more serious. Deciding she couldn't intervene, Chloe composed herself and went to meet Ryan. Deep down, Emily wondered if she could break things off with Jack. He was assertive, forceful. He didn't wait for her to decide. He simply acted. As darkness fell, Chloe returned home to find her father resting in his room, the weight of the evening still lingering in the air. A faint glow emanated from the bathroom, where the light was on and the door slightly ajar. Chloe realized her father likely wanted some light, though none of the room's lamps offered such a soft, subdued glow. "Dad," she called quietly, stepping into the doorway. He remained facing away from her but spoke, his voice low. "Chloe, I'm sorry." Her heart tightened at the sound of those words. She stepped closer, feeling the lump in her throat grow. "I'm sorry for what I did," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I could help Mom, but I didn't realize how much it would hurt you." She wiped away a tear. "She was so upset about what happened to you, and I just wanted to fix things." Ethan turned to face her, his eyes soft but cautious. It was clear he had distanced himself since discovering she had helped her mother find a new partner. Despite the pain, he couldn't ignore the vulnerability in his daughter's voice. "Ryan's dad. He's been through a lot since Mrs. Coyle passed," Chloe continued. "Ryan says his dad talks about how much he misses her, how hard it is to be alone, and I thought maybe they could help each other." She sighed, a mix of regret and realization in her tone. "I never thought about how it would affect you." Ethan looked at her for a long moment before asking, "Is that what happened that night?" His voice was steady, but the question still carried an edge of hurt. Chloe nodded. "Mostly, yeah. I didn't think it would hurt anyone. I guess I was down because I couldn't, well, you know." She shrugged helplessly. "But it's over now, Dad. I won't let it happen again." Ethan gave her a small, pained smile. "I hope not," he said quietly. "I need you." Chloe hesitated before asking, "Are you going to divorce Mom?" Ethan's face hardened, but he kept his voice calm. "I haven't decided yet, honey, but unless she stops seeing Jack, I don't see any other outcome." He paused, weighing his words. "But keep this between us. She needs to change because she wants to, not because she's forced to." Chloe nodded, absorbing his words. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. Then, in a quieter tone, she added, "Oh, and I broke up with Ryan tonight." Ethan raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You did?" Chloe lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked up at him. "Yeah, you were right about him. I didn't see it before, but now I realize he wasn't good enough for me." Her voice softened, almost shy now. "I guess I just needed to see it for myself." Ethan smiled faintly. "You did the right thing, Chloe." Without another word, Chloe crossed the room and hugged him. It was the first time in a long while that they'd shared a real embrace. Ethan closed his eyes, savoring the brief moment of warmth before she pulled away and headed upstairs. The soft click of her bedroom door closing echoed in the still house. Ethan heard Emily's voice as she returned to the house, cheerful and casual as she locked her car. The warmth he'd felt a moment ago drained away instantly, replaced by the cold weight of reality. A few minutes later, Emily entered their bedroom, freshly showered. The scent of soap and something else lingered around her. "Could you help with the groceries, please?" she asked, as though everything was normal. "Did you get everything on the list?" Ethan fought to keep his tone even. "Yes, Ethan. I said I was going grocery shopping, and I did." He unloaded the bags onto the counter, noticing immediately that there were no perishables, no milk, no eggs, no bread. He glanced at the receipt and saw she'd left the store nearly 2 hours ago. "You went shopping first, then visited Jack?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Yes," Emily replied, almost matter-of-factly. "I said I was going grocery shopping, and I did." Ethan turned away, retreating to the bedroom after unpacking the groceries. His mind raced, considering whether it was worth reopening the conversation. But Emily had already made it clear where she stood. She wasn't changing her ways. Emily appeared in the doorway a moment later. "Need to talk some more?" she asked, her voice flat, almost challenging. "No, Emily," Ethan replied firmly, his voice tight with frustration. "Your stance is crystal clear." Her expression softened, but only slightly, as if she regretted nothing. "I love you, Ethan," she said quietly, "but I need this. You don't understand." Ethan didn't reply. He lay back on the bed, closing his eyes. He had hoped, for a moment, that things could still be repaired. But now, it was clear that nothing could bring them back to what they were. The divorce proceedings had begun in full force. Emily had hired a tough lawyer, pulling out every stop to try to get the upper hand. Ethan expected this, and had already taken the first step toward protecting himself by starting therapy. The psychologist's testimony about his mental stability had been crucial, and the judge had ruled in his favor. But it wasn't just the legal battle that weighed on him. It was Emily's continued resistance to the reality of their situation. She refused to see how her actions had broken their family. And then it was Chloe who intervened, stepping in with quiet but undeniable strength. "Mom, you're breaking the family apart," Chloe had said firmly. "You promised to stand by Dad, for better or worse. You're not keeping that promise. And if you keep this up, you'll lose both him and me." Confronted with the possibility of losing her family, Emily finally relented. The divorce moved forward, and the house was sold. Ethan agreed to pay alimony for a period, but it wasn't out of guilt. It was what the court would have ruled anyway. Emily settled into a 2-bedroom apartment near her work, returning to full-time employment 8 months after the divorce. The breakup had embittered her, especially when Jack ended their relationship, revealing his involvement with other women. Once no longer married, Emily's charm seemed to fade, and she became increasingly resentful of Ethan. She blamed him entirely for the divorce. One evening, as Chloe overheard her mother lamenting how Ethan wasn't understanding enough, she snapped back. "Did you even consider Dad?" Chloe retorted sharply. On a quiet Friday night, around 10 p.m., Ethan entered a dimly lit bar, seeking a brief escape. He wasn't looking for anything serious, just a drink or two, maybe some dancing. He settled onto a bar stool and ordered a rum and coke. As he surveyed the crowd, his gaze landed on a woman at the far end of the bar who looked strangely familiar. She had dark brown flowing hair and a revealing dress, and an empty wine glass in front of her. As he looked at her more intently, the memory clicked. A smile crept onto his face as he took a sip of his drink and approached her. Just as he was about to speak, the woman glanced up, meeting his gaze. "Dr. Turner?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with a mix of recognition and curiosity. She studied him for a moment before her face lit up with recognition. "I leave the title Dr. Turner at the hospital," she replied with a playful smile. "Out here, I'm just Olivia, but I'm afraid you have the upper hand. It's been a while. I'm sure you interact with far more patients than I do with exceptional psychologists. Test me. What was your name again?" Ethan chuckled. Ethan Blake. Olivia paused, her brow furrowing as she recalled his name. Ah, Mr. Blake. A cheating spouse and a rather sudden encounter with a tree, if memory serves. You've been through quite a bit, haven't you? Spot on, Ethan replied, smirking. It's surprising we've only spoken twice in nearly 2 years. But here we are, chance, I suppose. Care for a drink? They both sat at the bar as Ethan signaled for refills. Olivia raised her glass to him. Thanks, I'm game. So what brings you out tonight? Seeing someone special? Trying to, Olivia responded, her eyes sparkling with mischief. How about you? Ethan raised an eyebrow. I seem to remember a rather impressive rock on your finger not too long ago. Or was I mistaken? Olivia's smile faded for a brief moment. Not long after my divorce, I kept wearing the ring. It was a kind of statement to make my ex-husband realize he had less in common with a 20-year-old cashier than he thought. Unfortunately, I didn't succeed. Good Lord, Ethan muttered, raising an eyebrow. Are they still together? Olivia laughed softly. Surprise, Mr. Blake, but I lost interest in Wayne's love life post-divorce. No clue. A dumb question, admittedly. And please, Ethan, spare me the Mr. Blake. Ethan laughed and nodded. Fair enough. What did your ex call you? Ethan. So, Ethan, care to hit the dance floor? Olivia asked, standing and offering him her hand. I'm game. The two made their way to the dance floor. They quickly fell into sync, swaying effortlessly to the music. The tempo shifted as a slower, sensual song began, and they stayed entwined, moving as one. Olivia wrapped her arms around Ethan's neck, while he held her close, his hands resting firmly on her back. Ethan couldn't help but notice the absence of a bra beneath her dress, and the observation wasn't lost on him. They locked eyes briefly, a shared understanding passing between them. Then Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder, their embrace unbroken. When the music shifted again, Olivia took advantage of the quieter moment to speak softly in Ethan's ear. Ethan, I've had my fill of dancing, but I'm feeling a little lonely, if you catch my drift. Ethan's pulse quickened, and he leaned in to whisper, How about I take you home and we address that? They made their way back to the bar, where Ethan paid the tab and then to his car. As they drove, he hesitated for a moment. Olivia, I should have asked earlier, but how much have you had to drink? She smiled knowingly. I only had 1 glass of wine at the bar. Just making sure, he replied. I don't take advantage of intoxicated women. Olivia laughed lightly. Don't worry, Ethan. Arriving at his underground parking garage, they took the elevator up to his floor. Olivia stayed close to him, stealing kisses along the way. As soon as they entered his apartment, she wasted no time. The door closed behind them, and she swiftly pulled off her dress, revealing her bare skin beneath. Ethan, you look absolutely stunning, he whispered. Thank you, Olivia purred, her voice thick with desire. But are you just going to admire? I hope not. Ethan grinned, taking her hand. Then lead me to your bedroom. Once they were inside his bedroom, Olivia wasted no time. I hope you have contraceptives. Ethan opened the drawer next to his bed and pulled out a pack, setting it on the nightstand. After an hour of passionate lovemaking, they collapsed into the bed, spent and content. Ethan lay on his back, Olivia curled up against his side. They lingered in a serene, half-awake state. Finally, Olivia stirred. Ethan, she said softly, her voice filled with curiosity, I just remembered something. The issue of erectile dysfunction in your story. Did that ever get resolved? Olivia asked quietly, still tracing her finger along Ethan's chest. Thankfully, it's no longer a problem, Ethan replied with a relaxed smile. What happened? Well, a couple of months after the accident with the oak tree, I started to feel a tingling sensation, like a paralyzed limb starting to recover. It persisted for weeks, Ethan explained, his tone distant as he recalled the strange experience. Were you still married? Did you discuss it with your wife? Technically, yes, we were still married, but we'd been living apart for a while, Ethan admitted. And no, I didn't bring it up with her. It didn't seem relevant. Over the next few months, he continued, I started noticing morning hardness more often, sometimes even during the day. By 8 or 9 months, everything just returned to normal. What did the doctors say? They couldn't give me a definitive answer, Ethan said with a shrug. Despite all the tests, they couldn't pinpoint the cause. They thought maybe the impact from the tree somehow resolved the issue. But, honestly, it remains uncertain. Well, I guess I'm fortunate, Olivia murmured. There was a brief pause before she added, "Do you mind if I stay the night?" Ethan's smile deepened. "All right. Are we planning to have another round in the morning, then grab breakfast together?" Olivia chuckled softly. "Maybe. Let's see how we feel." As they settled in for the night, Ethan had one more question that lingered in his mind. "Olivia, do you feel ready for a serious relationship?" he asked, his voice low and tentative. There was a long silence. Ethan worried he'd overstepped, perhaps asked too much too soon. He could feel the attraction between them, but it was more than just physical. Olivia was intelligent and engaging, and he enjoyed her company more than he expected. While it wasn't love yet, she was the first woman he had seriously considered after his divorce. "Can we talk about this in the morning?" Olivia finally asked, her voice soft and uncertain. "Of course," Ethan replied. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Ethan." Olivia woke before Ethan, finding him still asleep. Deciding not to disturb him, she quietly made her way to the shower, then headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Ethan's question from the previous night still lingered in her mind. It wasn't that she wasn't attracted to him, she was, but she had spent months convincing herself that she didn't need a man in her life. She had a good job, supportive friends, and for a while, that was enough. But deep down, she longed for companionship. How would a decent man react if she shared her truth with him? Would he accept her or walk away? The aroma of breakfast soon roused Ethan from his sleep. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Olivia wearing his shirt from the previous night, paired with the apron he kept in his closet. "I was planning to invite you for breakfast, but I guess it's a bit late for that now," Olivia teased. "How about lunch instead?" Ethan smiled and nodded. "Go get a quick shower, and I'll have breakfast ready in 10 minutes. By the time Ethan returned from his shower, Olivia had set the table. The meal consisted of an omelet, sausages, and buttered toast. "I didn't realize I had sausages in the freezer," she said, eyeing the dish. "I hope they're still good." "They're fine," Ethan replied, taking a bite and nodding in approval. "This is great." Breakfast passed quietly, with Ethan cleaning up afterward while Olivia relaxed. They chatted casually about work and life until everything was tidied up. Once the dishes were in the dishwasher, Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. "Are you ready to talk?" he asked gently. "Mostly," Olivia replied, taking a deep breath. "Listen, Ethan, I don't want to complicate things or intrude on your life. If you're only interested in something casual, that's fine. You don't owe me anything." "There's something I need to tell you," Olivia continued, standing up. "Can we talk about it in the bedroom? I'll feel more comfortable there." Ethan nodded and stood, taking her hand as they walked to the bedroom. They sat on the bed, facing each other. Olivia squeezed his hands tightly. "Ethan, although we only met last night, I think you're a wonderful person, and I genuinely like you. But there's something important you should know." She paused before continuing. "I told you my husband left me for a younger woman, and that's true. But it's not the whole story. The main reason he left was because I can't have children. He wanted a family of his own, and he couldn't accept adoption as an alternative. He saw our inability to have biological children as a failure on my part." Olivia looked down, her eyes filled with sadness. "I'm in my 40s now, with an adult daughter. I wouldn't mind having more children, but it's not a deal-breaker for me." Ethan nodded. "Good to know." There was another pause before Olivia spoke again, her voice a bit more hesitant. "There's something else. After the divorce, I went through a rough patch. I was grappling with my age and the fact that my husband left me for someone much younger." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, allowing her to continue. "I'm 37, she said, offering him a slight, self-deprecating smile. "I felt incomplete. Honestly, I didn't feel much like a woman at all." "How can you feel like a woman when you can't have children?" Ethan didn't speak, his expression soft and understanding. "So, I decided to reclaim my femininity. If I couldn't do it through motherhood, I would do it in other ways. I engaged in casual encounters. I even adopted an alias, Angela, and never turned down an opportunity when I felt like it. This went on for months, until I realized it was self-destructive. I went to therapy, but I didn't completely stop right away. It took a while for me to get it under control. She looked at him, her eyes vulnerable. Wasn't that what you were up to last night? Ethan asked cautiously. I don't mean to sound judgmental, I'm just curious. Olivia nodded. Yes, that's right. Last night, I was on the prowl. I won't lie, but I wasn't just looking for a fling. Something about you. It's different. Ethan felt a knot loosen in his chest. Thanks for being honest with me, Olivia. She smiled faintly. I'm not proud of it, but I think I'm done with that part of my life. Ethan leaned back on the bed, processing everything. So, where do we go from here? Olivia met his gaze, her expression uncertain. I don't know. Let's just take it one step at a time. As a woman, I have needs, and sometimes I go out to fulfill them, Olivia said, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. But now, I'm more selective about who I choose. There have been many nights when I ended up going home alone, taking care of things myself. Ethan met her gaze, understanding her more than she knew. I suppose I should be grateful I passed the test, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Of course, Ethan. I genuinely enjoy our time together, Olivia replied, then added. And to answer your question, I'm keen to explore more. But I want to be transparent about my past experiences. I recently got tested, and fortunately came out clean. I'm not on birth control, but I can provide a note from my doctor if you need confirmation. Assuming you're open to it, I suggest we both get tested and commit to exclusivity. Ethan sat in silence for a few moments, processing her words. Olivia waited, her eyes focused on him. Finally, he spoke. Olivia, thank you for being so upfront. I know that couldn't have been easy. I think I owe you the same. He took a breath. After my divorce, I was relieved it was over, but I struggled with feelings of inadequacy. I didn't know how I'd find another partner, and I was terrified of being alone. My therapist pointed out that as we age, many women lose interest in lovemaking and prefer non-carnal affection, Ethan continued, shrugging. I thought I'd have to find someone much older than me, or wait for things to improve. But even when things seemed to get better, I wasn't in the best shape. Like you needed to prove your femininity, I needed to prove my masculinity. I went out often, not any more selective than you, trying to feel like I was still worthy. Some encounters were casual. Let's just say I've had my fair share. He paused, then added, it continued for a while, but I wasn't as lucky as you. I contracted gonorrhea and had to confess to my doctor that I couldn't even remember the names of my partners. We addressed it, and through therapy, I started to understand my behavior. It's been a long time since I've been with a woman without protection, but I'm willing to get tested and commit to exclusivity. So, what do you think? Should we give this a shot? Olivia's eyes locked onto his, already knowing the answer. I suppose so, Ethan said, almost amused by her certainty. The next 3 months in their relationship were filled with warmth and comfort. Ethan and Olivia spent every night together, hinting at a more permanent commitment. They even started blending their lives. Olivia got along well with Chloe, and their bond seemed unshakable. One evening, they decided to visit a club catering to a more mature crowd. The DJ played a mix of old and new tunes, and the layout allowed for easy conversation. As they were enjoying the night, Ethan's smile suddenly disappeared. Olivia followed his gaze, spotting someone at the bar. Emily. Their eyes locked, and Ethan's expression turned neutral. Emily's face twisted into a smirk as she approached the table. Ethan, how delightful to see you, Emily said with unmistakable sarcasm. Emily, Olivia, this is my ex-wife, Emily, Ethan introduced, though he would have preferred not to. Pleased to meet you, Emily. I've heard quite a bit about you, Olivia offered. Emily's smile faltered. Well, I haven't heard a single word about you, she retorted bitterly. We're divorced, Emily. It's been over a year. My life is no longer your concern, Ethan interjected, hoping to end the conversation. Of course, Ethan. I wouldn't want to intrude on your date, Emily said. But Olivia, there's something you should know. Olivia raised an eyebrow. What's that? You probably don't want to mess with him. We got divorced because he couldn't perform, Emily added, the venom clear in her voice. Ethan remained quiet, letting Olivia handle it. Olivia, however, struggled to suppress a soft laugh. She turned to Ethan. Is that true? I don't recall you mentioning that. Ethan simply shrugged. Emily had no idea how much she'd misjudged him. Is that what you're telling people? Olivia asked, her voice tinged with mockery. Well, that's fortunate. If what I was writing last night wasn't aroused, then a real hardness would probably finish me off. Emily's smile faltered as she struggled to process the comment. She blinked at Olivia, unsure of how to respond. What is she talking about? Olivia asked, glancing at Ethan for confirmation. Ethan sighed. Apparently, Chloe hasn't been keeping her updated on my personal life, he said, his tone dry. Well, that's a relief, Olivia added with a grin. I guess everything's working fine now, huh? Wait, what? Emily gasped. Are you telling me? It's been taken care of, Ethan said, his voice cool. But this conversation? It ended our marriage. Emily's eyes gleamed with curiosity, but Ethan remained silent, not giving her the satisfaction of further details. What was it? Emily pressed, her voice rising with frustration. Ethan met her gaze, his expression steely. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that I'm not obligated to explain myself to you. We're divorced. My personal matters are mine. Emily's expression shifted, her frustration turning to realization. I can't believe this, she muttered. It's like fate is against me. Ethan's voice was sharp. No, Emily. It's not fate. It's just that my choices, my actions, led me here. You're the one who made the choice to leave. There was a long silence before Ethan spoke again. And you know what? If you had stood by me, as our vows said, we might still be married. But you chose differently. Emily stood frozen for a moment, stunned by his words. Her mouth opened and closed, but no response came. Finally, after a long pause, Emily lowered her gaze and spoke softly. You're right, Ethan. I owe you an apology. My actions were selfish, and I should have been stronger. I destroyed a good marriage. I'm truly sorry. With that, Emily turned and walked away from the table, and eventually left the club entirely. Ethan and Olivia watched her go, a mix of pity and relief settling between them. Let's dance, my love, Ethan said, a smile returning to his face. 6 months later, Ethan and Olivia tied the knot.